going to tell you a little bit about Deb. So she has been an architect for many, many years, and she has a lot of international experience. She has had many senior executive roles in the New South Wales government, and Stockland, and lots of board positions. But I actually was asking Deb, you know, what makes you tick? What are some of the things that you love to do? And there are two things that she told me. One is mentoring. She was a mentor for the Australian Business Company Network program, and she mentored the Deputy Principal of Fairfield High. It's a great mentoring program, and it helps disadvantaged schools and disadvantaged students all through New South Wales. So that's one of the things that make her tick. The other thing I personally really love, because it's my secret hobby as well, she makes her own dresses. So she makes her own clothes, and she makes the patterns, which I remember doing when I was a kid, and I don't have any time to do it anymore, but I just think that is such a fantastic hobby, and it really suits with what you do now. So I would like to invite you up and for you to tell us what the Greater Sydney Commission is and the plans for the Northern District. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Debra Deering.
Thanks very much, Amanda. And I must say I didn't make this at all. This is something which I purchased. I was not brave enough to wear some, but my creations are very unusual, so I keep them for social events rather than work-related. Thank you very much for having me. A number of you I know have already been to some of our community engagement workshops over the past months, and so I'm not going to repeat what we discussed there. But suffice to say, for those who haven't heard of the Greater Sydney Commission, we are a newly established independent statutory authority which has been put together with 13 commissioners. As a group of 13 commissioners. 6 of them are district commissioners, and the goal, they have been appointed by the state government, but they were nominated by all of the councils that they represent. As a district commissioner, let's know where to go forwards. I'm obviously the district commissioner for the North District, which comprises all of the councils above, the 9 councils of Hornsby, Hunters Hill, ku-ring-gai, Lane Cove, Northern Beaches, Mossman, North Sydney, Ryde and Willoughby. So there's a lot of councils. And the interview process was, at the time there were 11 councils, 11 mayors, and a number of them had general managers there as well. And it was a fabulous privilege to be appointed and asked to represent this group of councils going forward in the planning for Metropolitan Sydney. Now, there are 6 other district commissioners. There are also 3 expert commissioners who are participants on the commission, and they are an expert in environment, an expert in social issues, and an expert in the economy. And we also have ex officio members as head of the Department of Planning, head of the Department of Transport, head of Treasury, and our Chief Commissioner, Lucy Turnbull. So you may have heard Lucy's Bradfield oration reported in the press recently. We've been looking at the way we manage Sydney going forwards. We are very fortunate that Sydney is actually a growing city. There are plenty of cities around the world which aren't so fortunate, and trying to deal with the challenge of a shrinking, declining economy is far from fun. Mind you, the challenges accompanying growth aren't insubstantial. And our big challenge is, how do we do that? What we're working on as a key priority at the moment is the preparation of draft district plans. We're doing that in collaboration with all of the councils. We have had a number of workshops, full-day workshops over the past 6 months with each of the councils, their planning department. We have had briefings with the councillors, not as fulsome as we would like, but we are just at the beginning of a discussion and a conversation, not at the end. We are hoping in the coming week to be able to put out a draft district plan for each of the districts of Metropolitan Sydney, and they will be on exhibition for the coming 4 months. Until the end of March, we will be having workshops and opportunities to people provide their comments. We haven't, to this point in time, had anything around which we can actually focus, so this is what we're aiming to do. The plans themselves are outlining a vision for the next 20 years, but within the context of a 40-year horizon for the growth of Sydney. The plan itself is not your typical planning document. It's going to be in a number of components. One of the key components is the evidence base, which we are making public. There's already a number of reports on our website. We'll also have a dashboard that begins to monitor how the state is progressing in terms of the growth of metropolitan Sydney and the management objectives. And we'll be looking at a whole lot of implementation actions which will be working collaboratively with state agencies and with councils. Fundamentally, and there's a lot of work to be done aligning the initiatives of separate state government departments. It's not surprising that they operate to some degree separately because they're all focused on delivering a particular service. And those services are often all-consuming. Delivering the metro, for example, is an enormous task. Delivering health services is an enormous task, as is education facilities an enormous task. Our task in planning for Sydney is how do we align those priorities and that planning, those projections, so that they all come on stream when needed, where needed, in an appropriate format. And that's the role of the Greater Sydney Commission. We're doing it with communities because communities know the area better than we do. There's no doubt. I've lived in this North District for the past 35 years, and it's my home and I love it. But I still know that people from Pittwater, for example, know Pittwater issues far better than I do because I'm in North Sydney. So it is how to engage bottom up and not just top down, as has been the case in the past. We've been talking to the councillors and the council teams, initially because they were the representatives. They have gone through a process over the past 4, 5, 6 years of developing what's called community strategic plans and have engaged closely with their communities to understand what the goals and the issues are. So we use them as a representative or a way into understanding the context that we're dealing with. And we heard from the councils that, no surprises there, the biggest issue in the North District is traffic congestion. We know there's not only traffic congestion Monday to Friday when we go to and from work, but traffic congestion on Saturday and Sunday is often more problematic than what it is during the week because everyone's going almost in a chaotic framework from A to B to C to D at random, and they're all on the road in the car. So that's an enormous issue which came up time and time again. We know that in the North District, we have services in certain parts of the municipalities which are under stress, under pressure to be redeveloped for residential. And they are the industrial zones, the places where you go to buy a tile or a ladder, or the place where you get your panel beating work done, or odd jobs. Those sort of locations, such as in Artarmon, such as Lane Cove West, such as over at Smith Street, Chatswood West, Chatswood East Chatswood, they are critically important to be retained, that they're not given over to other users. Because if they do become a purpose which is actually not urban support in its essence, then we have to then drive for significantly further to actually get the things that we need. So fundamentally, one of the approaches that we're taking is, wherever possible, go local. Have your jobs locally, near where you live, your recreation locally, your services locally, trying to manage travel demand rather than encouraging and exacerbating the problems. I'm not going to read through all of those things, but we got a lot of information from the council staff. We also spoke to the community in a range of forums, including through the schools. I spent a number of days out speaking to high school students. We spoke to people at sporting events. We spoke to people in community forums and environmental forums, and they certainly valued parks and communal spaces, but they also talked about congestion. They also talked about more easy access to train stations. Some parts of this district have great train facilities, but often it's hard to get to them. So you have to actually drive to the train. That's a little bit self-defeating. So how do we deal with that? We know a number of people, the demand for separated cycleways, high on the agenda from all of the feedback that we've got. What I want to talk about very briefly, because I've got limited time. I know I've only got 2 minutes. I'm going to fly through this. I apologise. I might actually take an extra 2 minutes. Amanda will get cross with me. But I wanted to talk through, when we discuss growth, we know, and these numbers are quite interesting, Sydney is growing by a couple of million people over the next 20 years. That's enormous. We know that the North District currently has a population around 900,000 people, and in 20 years, we anticipated to have 1.1 million people. That's an annual growth rate roughly across Metro Sydney of about 1.6%. Now this chart, these are recent statistics which have been released by the Department of Planning. Interestingly enough, over the past 100 years, it is about 100 years, our population has always increased by about 1.5% per annum. The difference is when you've got a population of 1 million people growing at that rate, it seems to be manageable. When you've got over 4 million and you're growing at that rate, it seems hugely problematic. But we are not just growing, and it is natural evolution predominantly. People aren't leaving New South Wales anymore. And in fact, we've got more people coming to New South Wales than we've had in the past. People are coming from Brisbane, from Perth, places, because they know that Sydney is the powerhouse of the country. We know that we are having, you just have to walk around Chatswood or North Sydney and to see the number of children in strollers. It's not just one child. You'll often see a stroller with 2 or 3 in the same stroller. We have a baby boom, an enormous number of babies. And we have a whole lot of old people, I mean, including myself included. I'm old, and we are staying much longer alive, and we are staying healthier, and this is a transformation. We know that the number of people in the 65 plus age group over the coming years is going to double. Now, if you think, what does this actually mean for our community? And I'll show you a chart here, which I find fascinating. Oh, hold on, this one. Now, this is a chart which shows which parts of our community are growing. And you can see the dark blue line is actually the projection in 20 years' time. And the pale blue line is where we are now. Look at the number of children in the 0 to 19 group. And if you think that we've got pressure on our schools at this point in time, we ain't seen nothing yet. And look at the people who are ageing 65 plus. That's an enormous. So what does that mean for our businesses? What does that mean for our infrastructure? What does that mean for our way of life? And how do we manage? This is a really significant changes. And look at the people in the 20 to 59. They're the ones who are out there working, generating the taxes to support us all to fulfil the needs that we expect. And there's not many of those. There's very few of those. So this is a fundamental shift. And we need, in planning for our future, to understand and be fully aware to tackle this. And we need to be able to learn how to deal with it. This is also interesting. Even if our population wasn't growing, because of the changes to our ageing population, and it says in the notes, this is notes from the Department of Planning, that as the population ages, there will be more empty nesters and older people living alone. And even without any growth, we will still need 140,000 extra houses in the next 20 years. That's a staggering number. So, what have we been doing at the Greater Sydney Commission? We're looking at trying to actually evolve a plan for Sydney's growth, which is a responsible plan, and it's not just focused on the economy. We need to make sure the economy prospers, but we also need to make sure some other things as well. So, we have been looking at a model, and you may have heard this reported in the media relatively recently. Lucy talked about it at a Bradfield oration. Looking at Sydney, while Sydney has traditionally been only considered in terms of the eastern city, which North Sydney and Chatswood is a key component, it actually extends a very broad geography. And there are probably 3 parts to Sydney going forwards. If we are going to grow and manage the growth that we anticipate, we need to acknowledge where that growth can happen and plan for it sustainably in advance. So we're talking about the established city, which is on the eastern side of the metropolitan area, a developing central area that's all around Parramatta. The future of Parramatta is critically important, and an evolving, what we're calling the emerging west, which is all focused around the future airport. Huge opportunities that we have to take and grapple with now so they're set up to deliver the outcomes that we are expecting going forward to ensure that in time we still maintain livability. These are what's happening with our jobs profile. We see that our North District is pretty significant in terms of delivering the jobs. We have been looking at, as Narelle spoke about, a city which is only about the economy and productivity is not really the city that certainly I want to live in. I want to live in a city which is socially responsible, a great place to be, a place that I want to stay and not a place that I want to get away from. So we have been focusing, putting a lot of effort into what makes a socially sustainable city. What makes a city livable. And there are a number of criteria. How can we build that into our planning process and our strategies? And it covers about a sense of belonging. It's not just about cramming more people into spaces. It's not just about building more houses. It's about how do we deal with all of those attributes that are listed behind me as a fundamental part of our planning system. And environmental sustainability is also critically important. We know that climate change is upon us. I don't think there's any doubt about that anymore. We know that we have to ensure that we actually have a resilient city. The central component, adaptation and resilience, is a key consideration. We need to work out how we manage climate change effects and how we deal with the unexpected shocks that it might present to us. We also have to understand, as a growing place, that what are the cultural landscapes, what are the environments that we really love and we want to cherish and we want to retain. They are a key component and need to be protected and need to be enhanced. We also need to look at how do we manage our wastes, our inputs and our outputs from our cities, so that they are more efficient. If we keep just discarding waste at the rate that we have in the past, we're not going to be able to manage it at the rate that we're growing. And we're also looking at how do we actually not just have green open spaces, which are the lungs of the city, but how can we link them up so they're multi-purpose, so we can have not just about 3 parks, but we can have 3 parks or 100 parks and effective links between them, so that the sum is greater than the parts themselves. And I'm going to be very quickly in this. I know that North Sydney and Chatswood have been doing some fabulous things. On the left-hand side, the concourse, fabulous facilities. Actually, for the first time that I've been living here for 35 years, Chatswood actually has a heart. Chatswood has a place to go. You've got markets which are vibrant, multicultural, wonderful places. Absolutely wonderful. We know that North Sydney is going through an extraordinary change. I can barely recognise it. Everything's a building site. There's cranes everywhere. There's no public space. Now, what I want to say is that what I fear is incremental development, ad hoc, piece by piece, where in fact there is no overarching view of how they come together. The critical component is being able to plan in advance so we know this is what we want to happen and how one building or one precinct should relate to another and maximise the opportunities that they present. Without that context, all we're going to have is building by building by building, and we're going to miss out on all of these fabulous opportunities that the left-hand examples actually demonstrate. And going forwards for both Chatswood and North Sydney, what could we do? What could we look at? What are the opportunities that are there? And I think we just have to open our eyes and look at them and say, okay, what are the areas that we could focus on? And I'm going to put up a couple of examples, not to tell everyone how awful the place is, it's not. But we have clear examples which, I remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when some of these places were first being built. And I thought, what are we going to do with that? Now is the time. Now is the time, for example, when we can start to look at this street. This is an urban environment. Now we've got a chance to say, how can we improve that urban environment? What can we do with it going forward? We know places have to grow. We know little laneways and accessways. Here's a street in Chatswood. That's not a street, that's just a brick wall and an empty pavement. What can we do about it? I mean, we've got plenty of opportunities for improving the city. We've got a bus interchange, which is about the least friendly place you could ever imagine wanting to go. And yet we're trying to get people out of their cars and onto buses. We have to make that a really fabulous place to be. And down in North Sydney, similarly, we've got, this is the major thoroughfare in North Sydney. And all I've got is walls. It doesn't feel like a street. It doesn't feel like a place. It just feels like walls and bitumen. And we've got a lovely little green space, one of the few, but it's fenced off. So, it basically says, don't come anywhere near me. What do we do about this? And similarly, this is a fixed square. That's actually sitting on the corner of a busy road. And they've recently, and fabulous that there's some new artwork there. That is absolutely terrific. But what else can we do to make it a place that people want to sit, visit and stay? Now, I've done my time, and I've gone over time, and I apologise, but I wanted to ask 3 questions, and maybe we can come back to them later on. Because the Greater Sydney Commission really wants input from yourselves to help us managing the planning of the district going forwards. And the questions that I wanted to ask, in terms of business sense, what would firms and employees appreciate? What would bring them here? What would support them in their work or in their innovations or in their initiatives? how can we support them to locate here and in North Sydney? Another question is, what is atypical in this district? Because we know what's sort of roughly the same across the whole of Sydney. Metropolitan planning in the past dealt with Sydney as a single, uniform, homogenous place. We know it's not that. We know that Sydney and our district is a mosaic of different places, of different characters, of different issues, of different opportunities. What are they and how is this place different? And if we can start to understand how this place is different, we might be able to respond to it more effectively and build some more opportunities on that. And how can we actually crowdsource information, or how can we get people involved to give us the feedback? Because planning is a really dry and boring thing for most people, and we genuinely need input and ideas. How do we manage to encourage that? And with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you.